The year is 2019. A quiet year for Kirby with no releases aside from Super Kirby Clash. How would we fill this void? In August of 2019, even though Super Kirby Clash came out in September, Klaire Fluffle began a series of videos that would shake the fandom by storm. Well, not really, but let's pretend it did. A series where we would shed some spotlight on copy abilities from Kirby, cleverly titled the Kirby Copy Ability Spotlight, where any ability could be evaluated based on its speed running performance. It had a good run, but one day the spotlights stopped. But one day they returned, and everyone watching, waiting for the series to return, all beamed. Hey, I still got those lame puns in me. Let's go. Yuppers, we welcome 2025 by reviving the Kirby Copy Ability Spotlights for their second season. And what better way to start this revival than with the ability that started it all almost 5.5 years ago. Wow. Beam Kirby! We'll be evaluating Beam Kirby's performance in efficient, speedrun-focused Kirby play over the years and determine how good, or bad, or half pie, that's a synonym for mediocre? Really? Beam Kirby is throughout the history of Kirby. Go figure. If you're wondering why I'm using speedrunning as the metric for efficiency, I've got an entire video explaining why right there. Go watch it, please. Yay! And just like last time, you get to decide what the next ability we cover is. Just leave a comment telling me what ability that you would like to see covered next. The deadline is January 18th, 2025, so don't wait to leave that comment. I'll do it later, the fool thinks, but the intelligent, attractive thinker thinks I'll leave a comment now. And head pat too. If you're feeling generous, maybe even a little spunky, you can get the like ability by pressing the thumbs up and get notified as soon as I upload more videos by subscribing and ringing that notification bell. In fact, let's put that to the test. If this video can hit 200 likes within 2 weeks, you will get the next episode a full week early. Whoa! Oh, but this time I'll actually keep an eye out for like potting. You're not getting me with that again. Grr. So before we begin reviewing Beam and the games that it's in, what does Beam Kirby actually do? I made a Beam pun earlier. Is Kirby just smile so brightly at their opponents that they all die on the spot? Kill them with kindness? Literally? Well, not quite. Beam Kirby, at its most basic, allows Kirby to summon energy from a wand, or their hands, depending on how hardcore they're feeling that day, and attack enemies with said energy. This is most commonly seen in the form of a whip, although, depending on the game, Kirby can also charge it with a big blast, bounce in the air while firing the energy down, or they can hover in the air with it, except that's only in 2 games. Beam was the first ability players were able to use in the entire series as early as the very first room of the very first level of the very first game that had copy abilities in it, Kirby's Adventure. It's often one of, if not the, first abilities you can get in the many games that it's in. Perhaps because of this, Beam is often very easy to use with very little in the way of insano stuff that lets it, as the kids say, go crazy. Then they floss or something. I don't know, kids still do that. Anyway, for what it lacks in craziness, it makes up for in how approachable it is, being good in several different ways, even if it's an ability that's a master of none. But are the ways that it's good actually efficient? Well, buckle in, folks, because there's a lot to say about Beam, given how iconic of an ability it is. And I think the best place to start is right where we left off. How Beam was designed to be a beginner ability, one that's good at a lot of things, but isn't quite masterful at any of them. And while this can maybe be said for newcomers to the series, as soon as you start looking at Kirby from a more efficient angle, you realize, wow, wait a minute, this ability is like really tough to use. while there are a lot of specifics that we can get into, this mostly comes down to its default attack, Beam Whip, not being any good. I'll be upfront, it's the worst move in Beam's entire kit, which isn't good considering that there are a decent amount of games where this is all it can do. The problem with this move, to be as blunt as an atom bomb, is that it's the master of none while being good at none. It's really got nothing going for it. Weak damage, poor range, it's slow. Jeez, don't even get me started on how wide open it leaves you. Across every game that it's in, you'd think Beam Whip would have something going for it, but no, I scoured for anything aside from an oopsie doopsie. I forgot to press a direction and or hold the button down, but at least life isn't terrible, right? But no, for Beam Whip, life is pretty terrible, actually. Thankfully, as we'll talk about, Beam Whip gets saved by the fact that Beam's other moves are all, at worst, kinda good. This won't be a huge downer of an analysis or anything, but wowee, I cannot stress enough just how bad Beam Whip specifically is. Looking at the games where this is your only option, things do look pretty dire. In Squeak Squad, for example, why use Beam Whip when it gives you no benefit to your mobility, and it's not a particularly strong option for bosses? Hammer gets Hammer Flip, the crazy move lets it annihilate bosses in every game that it's in. Cutter gets an insanely buffed Cutter Toss. Once upgraded, if you've never seen it shred health bars in this game, well, I like Cutter a lot, so you should. And even Tornado, an ability I constantly stress is not as good as it's often touted to be, clears anything that Beam can pull off. And it's the same sad story the deeper we go. Nightmare in Dreamland, Amazing Mirror, all the same. Canvas Curse? Yeah, you got Waddle Doo, but like, no, you can't get rid of Beam Whip. To me, that sounds worse. Beam Whip is Beam sad because it's Beam bad for all the same Beam reasons. The absolute worst of this, even more than Canvas Curse, is Kirby's Adventure. Let's ignore for a bit, just a bit, don't worry, reality, you're still gonna be here when we're done, that Tornado is in this game, and it's easily one of the best abilities in the whole series. Kirby's Adventure is a game of many things, but something that anybody, from the coziest of casual to the most epic emblems of efficiency, can relate to, is that Adventure is a game where you really want to minimize lag. And the simple act of using Beam, while not being the worst offender in this regard, oftentimes makes Kirby's Adventure chug. Meaning, yes, using Beam Whip and Adventure specifically is so bad, it oftentimes makes the game harder to play. Thankfully, while Beam struggles in games with less expansive movesets, it does a little better once it gets some other moves. For the most part, it's actually kind of bad, and the OG Superstar kind of forgot to mention. Not all of these moves are fantastic. For example, Revolution Beam is, just using Beam Whip in the air, except that you can make it go in a full circle. I'd slam on it for being kind of awful, except one, it's actually not that bad as a last resort kind of move, given that you use it in the air. And two, both this and Beam Whip were made about 30% faster or so in Return Deluxe, out of nowhere for some reason. And while Beam Whip, yeah, that move is still stinky, this was honestly a really nice buff for Revolution Beam. Lastly, and most importantly in its defense, I like it a lot. I'm really angry that it has to come back. I'll continue being angry, guys, they don't bring it back. Why haven't they brought it back? Okay, obviously the most important point is that 30% speed buff that actually does a lot to help it, in my own opinion doesn't really relate to the situation, but whatever! So in expanding Beam's moveset, what does it need fixed? And what would you need to do to make sure it stays intact about Beam as an ability? Well, there's a lot that you're going to need to fix, but assuming that we're not going to give it mobility, because spoilers, they never give Beam mobility at all, the big thing that it needs at least is one of the following: crazy damage, wildly high range, solid utility, or cheese. I know cheese sounds kind of weird, but lots of abilities have it in some degree of spades, even at their most basic. Beam never being given that option in the simpler games, yeah, kind of lame actually, to be TBH honest. While While the levels of success vary depending on what game we're talking about, Beam at least ends up doing pretty okay in a lot of these games. I talked about the Return to Dreamland duology already, and while Flare Beam doesn't add very much, given you only go for it considering you have to in a Hundo playthrough, yes, even in Return Deluxe where you move much faster, it is not worth giving up a truly dominant ability like Wing. But what about a game like Planet Robobot, where you can use multiple abilities and there's actual competition for which one you want to use, specifically in the Robobot armor? You know, it could fare much better. And trust me, Beam needs it because aside from Revolution Beam, nearly nothing changed about it from Superstar going into Planet Robobot, and like everything in between. It got nothing for mobility, it's weak versus bosses, especially in Planet Robobot. It has no utility in the main game by itself. For this, it needs a good Robobot ability to at least find an okay niche. Thankfully, Beam Robobot, yeah, it's actually quite good. Obviously, this doesn't mean a ton. If you're using the Robobot armor, you're gonna have a good ability no matter what. But Beam has the unique attribute of being super spammable and super strong. Normally, you're stuck charging something in order to make it super strong, but Beam just has to wait for the charge-up period every other time that you use it, and the charge period is shorter than the animation for throwing out the second one. Does that even count as a charge time? I don't know. Still, across all of the any %, all code cubes, and Hundo, Beam Robobot sees use as a very strong Robobot ability. Robility, right? Robobility? Ability? Huh, what happened? Huh? Did I doze off? Well, now that I'm back in the groove, before moving on, I will also quickly mention that Beam does actually fill another role in Planet Robobot, but we'll get to that one later. But enough of the gimmicks! How does Beam itself actually fare? Unfortunately, I already spoiled the boring news, so I don't have an interesting way to tell you that it never got mobility. Oh, well, that's not so bad, right? It's not like the best abilities all have solid mobility tools that help them move through the levels and decimate obstacles the game throws at you, right? Right? You did watch the video where I explained all of this, so you know how dire things are looking for Beam right now, right? But hey, look, it's not all bad. It randomly has the funniest use in Superstar Ultra, pretty much any category that involves Spring Breeze, where you get Beam in the first room of Spring Breeze so that you can get a quick kill on the first mini-boss by getting rid of it and using the ability star to deal some extra damage. Yes, it's hilarious. No, it has nothing to do with Beam, but since you have it anyway, you do get to save a couple seconds in that first room using some of Beam's minor mobility tools. Have you ever taken a second or two longer than you expected on literally anything in your life? If so, you know how big of a deal this is. Obviously, it's not, but for abilities like Beam that actually have nothing to do in either any % or a Hundo for most of these games, yeah, its kit isn't ideal for Hundo either, they maybe can excel in the boss rush modes. This is where Beam tries to shine, but it has varying levels of success. In games like both Return to Dreamlands and Triple Deluxe, it's passable. It really relies on its command grab capture beam, where Kirby grabs the star with the wand and sends it soaring to the skies to get much of anything done. But why, you may ask? Let's talk about this. While there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, having a good command grab is a fantastic trait or abilities to have. A good command grab is going to deal reliable, consistent damage because command grabs themselves are quite unreliable, at least against bosses. They always work as intended, don't get me wrong, but you need the boss to drop a star in order to even use them at all. The payoff, yeah, is really solid damage, at least if you can actually land the star hit. The actual effectiveness of command grabs varies from game to game, but we'll talk about some games with especially dominant command grabs later. For now, the good news is that Capture Beam, Beam's command grab, is consistently Beam's best tool for beating down bosses. Great damage, huge range, and pretty much went untouched ever since Return to Dreamland. Unfortunately, it has one really big downside holding it back. If it touches a boss before you send it soaring, it just doesn't work. Well, okay, it deals like a little bit of damage, but if you're going out of your way to use a command grab, you're gonna want it to, you know, work. There is a way around this. If you face the opposite direction of the boss when grabbing it, you've got a very small window to turn around and attack at the same time. It's pretty epic if you've tried it, failed it a bunch of times, and then eventually got it to work. But there are two problems with this, and they combine into each other so well, they horrifically morph into one creature, one that would scare even the bravest of beamers. I apologize for saying that word, actually. I'll never say it again. But the big problem winds up being if a command grab that's hard to make work is your best option, the rest of your kit better be good. If it's not, Beam will be able to settle for being okay, average, but not much more. The second problem with Beam is that, as stated a while ago, it's designed to be an ability with lots of good traits, but nothing really quite masterful. The rest of Beam's kit, aside from Capture Beam, is fine, but they don't deal with bosses effectively enough to where, when there's not a star to use Capture Beam on, Beam really can't do enough. It does have some cool options, but they're unfortunately spread across different games. For example, Cycle Beam, the grounded dash attack, winds up being really good in Triple Deluxe, but most of its other moves, aside from Capture Beam, obviously fail to impress. Meanwhile, to bring up Return again, Beam Blast, the dash attack that you can use in the air, yeah, that's great when you can't use Capture Beam, but again, the rest of Beam's kit doesn't really do all that good. If we dig into the spin-offs, Wave Beam, where you hold the B button for a bit and then let it go, a true metaphor for those things in life that we must let go even if we don't want to, winds up being excellent in a game like Kirby Fighters Deluxe because the AI is so AI on easy that they can't avoid it. But that said, the rest of Beam's kit, you get the idea. Again, Beam isn't bad in these games. It's quite decent actually, but that's all it's ever really gonna amount to, decency. Beam in this native form does come close to being good in a couple of games, even if it can't quite get there. Kirby Superstar Ultra, for instance, has a beam that, while it still doesn't contribute to any percent or hundo, beyond the hilarious Spring Breeze stuff, has a helper to hero run that falls squarely in the middle, ranked around 10th of the 20 abilities for use in said mode. What stands out to me about this, and why I think Beam goes from stuff like 4th from the bottom in Robobot to the top half, barely in Superstar Ultra, is that you actually get lots of values from nearly its whole kit. Capture Beam, no surprise, is good here, but it's probably at its best in this game. As I kind of alluded to before, command grabs are broken in one Kirby game, and that game is absolutely Superstar Ultra. Due to the smaller health bars and the actual properties of command grabs, they're just totally ridiculous. If you're quick enough, you can literally kill a mini-boss with Wave Beam as they make stars on the ground. The Wave Beam will hit them again, and that kills them. And if you can actually manage to grab that star with Capture Beam, you can damage the incoming next mini-boss with it. If you've never seen it, it looks really cool. And from there, you can immediately go into Beam's strong multi-hit moves like Cycle Beam and Beam Blast, which we already talked about, charge a Wave Beam because the charge in this game is honestly not that long. Heck, you can even Beam Whip if you decided that you want to give up hope and just throw a perfectly good run out the window. Wait, actually, no, you can't Beam Whip. Don't do it. You can't. Don't do it. But everything else in Beam's kit here is legit really good. But even KSSU doesn't have Beam in its peak okayness. In fact, you could even argue that Beam in Kirby Star Allies is pretty good. I wouldn't, because Story Mode any percent, and Story Mode 100%, and Heroes from Another Dimension, and Guest Star Allies are all right there, and Beam does basically nothing in any of those. In fact, you could say Beam in this game is actually bad. Shocker! The ability that hasn't had a good appearance in like 8 games is not good despite what I just said. But, of course, I left out Soul Melter EX intentionally, where Solo Beam does the impossible and cracks into the top half of abilities that have documented times. We're short of about 13 abilities, honestly, so Beam could be out, but I don't know, in a game like Star Allies with power creep that would make Pokemon look pathetic, this is pretty crazy, and it's all thanks to one move. And that one move is not Capture Beam. For what it's worth, don't get me wrong, Capture Beam here, excellent. And other changes to Beam's kit, like Cycle Beam getting a tipper mechanic like Marth and Smash Bros. Of all things, yeah, that definitely helps. But have you ever used Beam Blast in this game before? The simple act of running, jumping, and mashing your face on the big bad B button, or the big bad Y button, I guess, but that reads horribly. If you haven't, I suggest giving it a shot, because for some reason, the bounce you get out of it is even better than in a game like Superstar Ultra. Here, you can easily get 6 or 7 beam blasts in a single jump, and since Starlize is like Planet Robobot, every single hit of beam blasts, beams will hit bosses. This is an insane amount of damage, even if it doesn't work if you're too close. For some reason, it's fine. If you've used Beam in the other games, you're probably used to using an insanely tough ability to do well with. You're used to this. But something that Star Allies specifically introduced in full force, like really full force, is Boss Hit Stun. Not all abilities get this, and for sure, previous games have had Hit Stun on bosses, but Star Allies Hit Stun is in its own universe. And Beam Blast potentially has the strongest boss hit stun in the entire game. With Beam, some of these bosses start to finish just like literally can't do anything except stand still and wait in painful bliss as Beam Blast annihilates them. At least it destroys them quickly, given, you know, efficiency, speed running. We talked about all this. With all of that said, we have the ingredients in place now for what a good beam could look like. Capture Beam most likely is going to be involved, but it can't be the only really good move if it is a part of it, as command grabs can't consistently be used without stars, but, you know, the damage it does deal is really good, so yes, it's probably going to be a good move, but not mandated. Ideally, its whole kit, aside from the obvious Beam Whip, should contribute a little bit. And even if it isn't the strongest form of cheese in the game, it should have a way to use its dominant range and multi-hit attacks to cheese boss fights. Obviously, we don't have any traditional Kirbys left to see Beam's true potential in, at least the time of this recording, but the ingredients, if nothing else, are all in place. But what if I told you that Beam actually does have a few games that it's genuinely very good in, not almost good or kinda good, like, is really good. To start with the Outlier, I was very pleasantly surprised by how solid Beam is in Kirby Fighters 2. Looking at the single-handed mode, it doesn't look so good on hard or very hard, but the higher difficulties, really in all of the Kirby Fighters games, yeah, they're not very well optimized. Easy and normal to a slightly lesser extent, have a lot more favoritism due to the ease of consistency. Look, very hard, picking that may be the gamer move, but it's much easier to get record times when a game is easier compared to when it's harder. Explaining that's a video idea. Ooh. So how does Beam fare on easy and normal, if it's apparently actually good here? On normal, it gets a solid 8th place time out of 22 abilities. Genuinely impressive. However, even more impressive is the mode with the most competition, Easy, where it places an astonishing 4th place. That's almost top 3 in the most competitive single-handed category in the game. That's like amazing, actually. And even if the harder difficulties, they don't quite hold up, I think this more than makes up for that. It is also better here compared to Kirby Fighters Deluxe. There are a bunch of reasons for that. There is only the one boss fight with Shadow Kirby instead of 2 awkward boss fights. There is frankly better competition here. It's a variety of things. But what does Beam even do? Well, just like we explained earlier, it's got the pieces of the puzzle to make Beam good. Wave Beam is the dominant attack here. Sure, it's not perfect. The charge up time, it's pretty short, but it could be better. It's not a full screen nuke like you'd expect. It only goes half screen, but it does crazy damage to the AI, and like we kind of said before, the AI will just stand there. Its other moves, while far from necessary, are also pretty good in niche situations, and actually work quite well as a get off of me kind of situation. Of course, abusing the AI's generosity of them standing there counts as cheesing the game, so we got that too. And of course, while the days of it being the dominant move of Beam's kit are gone, until Return Deluxe, Capture Beam, still very good. This is all normal, or easy, depends on the difficulty, haha. But we need to talk about the speedruns for story mode. Specifically, as these are done on a new game file, the ability unlock process makes things fairly rigid. Sword for Chapter 1, Sword or Wrestler for Chapter 2, Hammer for Chapters 3 and 4, and finally, Fighter for Chapter 5. Fighter in Chapter 5 may come as a surprise, but Kirby Fighters 2's story mode, that sounds funny, gives you power-ups that increase your stats. Remember the word stats for later, kids. And one of the stats that gets powered up is charge time, reducing your charge time. This makes Fighter's Charged Fireball into one of the strongest moves in the entire series. That said, while Fighter is certainly the best of the bunch, I'm going to stop using only words and hard numbers for a little bit and use words, hard numbers, and a speedrun done during the most important time of the year for Kirby speedruns, K-Star 2024. This is a literal global event where Kirby runners from all over the globe, yes, Claire, that's what global means, compete in a team relay to see who can compete in predetermined Kirby games the fastest. In 2024's relay, we ran Kirby Fighters 2. I even competed there, and I got 3rd place. Whoa. That said, the real winner here was Beam Queen Soul, who, for Chapter 5, used Beam. She didn't win, unfortunately. This was actually largely due to bad luck and semi-winging the idea, but she unironically proved that Beam, and really any ability that can mimic what Fighter does, which is use charge boosts to fire attacks from full screen and win, can get genuine competitive times, at least to the point where they can be proven efficient. If the footage and the idea aren't enough, she did wind up getting a much better time down the line using Beam in Chapter 5, proving this point. All of these pleasantries aside though, if you know your Kirby games, there is a good chance you saw where Beam is truly at its best coming. Everyone knows Beam is absurd in these games, and while it's certainly better in one than it is in the other, it's undeniable that Beam is really, really good in both Super Kirby Clash and especially Team Kirby Clash Deluxe. Despite this, I'm what the meanie pants may call kind of a bozo, so I'm using Super Kirby Clash footage exclusively and being lazy about TKCD. At least, I'm honest. The reason for this, once again, comes down to the pieces of the puzzle that make Beam good. Well, alright, there's no real use for the command grab here, but otherwise, this is peak Beam. What makes Beam Age so good is that in a game that judges you purely by IGT or an in-game timer, Beam Mage lets you freeze the in-game timer. Wave Beam has been replaced with Time Beam, and whenever you land the move, you'll see a clock surround the boss. Once the hands of the clock do a full circle cycle, with a fully charged hit making the hands move a quarter of the way around, unless you land it when the boss is in the air, then you get a 50% boost on top of that, because, you know, why not? Time will freeze, allowing you to wail on a boss for a few seconds. No repercussions here, you just get to do this. It's crazy. It's great in both of these games, but between the two, it's definitely better in Team Kirby Clash Deluxe, like I said earlier. The main reason for this is that in Super Kirby Clash, you can level up much, much more than you can in Team Clash. This means your stats go way higher and allows abilities like Hammer, and really just Hammer actually, to outdamage bosses so hard that you don't really need Beam Mage. You know, it certainly helps, and you have far easier and a more straightforward run with Beam Mage while still touting efficiency, but yes, at the end of the day, it is outclassed. Team Kirby Clash Deluxe, because the levels are low and you need to get good ranks for gem apples, Beam Mage Cheese can win you almost every fight. I do guess you need to unlock it, and I think that takes 3 battles out of several dozen, but I don't know, it's something, I guess. Also, for those who didn't realize, Planet Robobot, that game, also has Kirby Clash. You want to know what's in Kirby Clash and Planet Robobot? Beam Mage! You want to know what's good in Kirby Clash and Planet Robobot? You guessed it, Beam Mage! And with that, we finally discussed Beam in every Kirby game. We now begin the Kirby Copy Ability Spotlight rankings, where I rank Beam in every game that it's been in based on nothing but the raw efficiency. Can you predict all 16 spots correctly? Here we go, lightning round style. 16, Kirby's Adventure. Actively makes the game slower and harder. Number 15, Kirby Canvas Curse. Also makes the game slower and harder, but the game still runs well enough at least. Number 14, Kirby Squeak Squad. It doesn't make the game slower, but it's so bad, it may as well just make the game harder. Number 13, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Unchanged from earlier games, while everything around it got a lot crazier. Number 12, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. Similar to many other games, but with weaker competition. Number 11, Kirby Superstar. It's still pretty bad, but it hasn't been explored in over a decade. It's KSS, so the potential for the cheese maybe exists. That's better than everything we've talked about already. Number 10, Kirby's Return to Dreamland. Flare Beam is forced and regular Beam has nothing to do otherwise, but it's like kind of okay for bosses. Number 9, Kirby Planet Robobot. Similar to Return, except everything around it is way better, and the Robobot armor makes really good use of it. Number 8, Kirby Triple Deluxe. It doesn't have the highs or lows of Planet Robobot, but it does better than in Return. Number 7, Kirby Fighters Deluxe. Pretty average all around, but hey, average is good enough compared to everything below it. Number 6, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Not saying the full name because, wow, that thing is long actually. Except I did say the long name, I didn't read the script, so this makes no sense. Number 5, Kirby Superstar Ultra. The first impressive Beam showing where its kit comes together to let Beam do some truly impressive things in Helper to Hero. And Spring Breeze, LMAO. Number 4, Kirby Star Allies. If it had more to do outside of its excellence in the ultimate choice, it would legit be pretty great. Oh well. Number 3, Super Kirby Clash. Not quite as good as in Team Kirby Clash Deluxe, but that's okay because it's still great. Number 2, Kirby Fighters 2. Actually does great things across multiple modes, a rarity for Beam across all of these games. And of course, number 1, Team Kirby Clash Deluxe. Don't you love that you're seeing Super Kirby Clash footage instead? Alrighty though, we're in the home stretch now of the video. Time to give out some rankings to Beam itself and answer the ultimate question, is Beam Kirby actually good? I'll be judging this in 4 categories, starting with beginner. This is for the speedrunner who's just getting started as a runner, has the drive to play well, but doesn't quite have the experience and knowledge under their belts. For this, I'd honestly give Beam like a D+. The plus is there, frankly, because of the Kirby Clashes. Actually, let's throw Fighters 2 in there as well. Outside of those, Beam is way too hard for a beginner to get right. Even in Star Allies, that mandates good enough spacing to where you may just want to say LMAO again and play someone like Magalore Taranza instead. Next, let's talk intermediate. You may not be going for the absolute best of the best times, but you know you're good at Kirby and you really want to push yourself to your limit. This is where I think Beam is at its best because its shortcomings, while notable, aren't as frustrating as they would be for a beginner, while still, actually being usable, unlike where you'd be at the very top. Still, I'm only gonna give Beam a C on this one. Even if you count the games where Beam is almost good in as, actually good, that's only 5 out of 16 games, not even a third. That said though, it gets that C rank because the games that it is good in, even the ones that it's almost good in, is pretty heckin' good. And you have a lot to work with in every game that we would talk about. Now, let's talk Beam on a more casual level. I give it a fun out of 10. Finally, let's talk more advanced play. The best of the best you're gunning for world records can only use the best of what the games give you. And Beam gets a D- here, but you know what? Not an F. Team Kirby Clash Deluxe and the occasional uses and stuff like Super Kirby Clash really help it out. The games like Superstar Ultra and Star Allies, even Kirby Fighters 2, where Beam comes close to being good, even compared to the absolute very best, don't really hold up at this point, but hey, you know what? It could be worse. Trust me, this could be worse. With that, I think we finally have the answer for if Beam is actually good. And I think said answer should be fairly obvious, but to reiterate the point, it's pretty okay. That may kind of sound like a bummer, and given how iconic Beam is, I am kind of inclined to agree with that idea. But coming into this video, honestly, I straight up thought it was gonna be bad in every single game, except for the Kirby Clashes, and thinking it'd be okay at best in Star Allies, like maybe. Games like Fighters 2 and Superstar Ultra really caught me off guard here, and even stuff like Return Deluxe and Fighters Deluxe managed to catch me off guard. Beam is like the ability that could. It's so approachable and widespread that everybody's used it. It's so popular that everybody's heard of it, and everyone has at least some degree of fun with it. Can I call Beam good? No. But can it be efficient? Yes, it can. Not very often, but it can. And that's a wrap! Oh boy, that was a doozy of a video. I'm glad to have the copy ability spotlights back though, and I am very glad I got to do Beam some proper justice. Because I will be blunt here, that first spotlight from, as I said, almost 5.5 years ago, complete garbage, and I'm genuinely thrilled to have finally updated it. But what spotlight do I update next? Do I even update one, or do we tackle something brand new? Only one way to find out, and that's by voting in the comments. Remember, voting ends on January 18th, 2025, with the next spotlight coming out a week early if we hit 200 unbotted likes by then, so get those votes in, and subscribe too, because that'd be cool, IDK. And if you would like to go the extra mile, please consider becoming a Puptron on Patreon, or join as a MemPup member on YouTube. You get nifty perks, including early access to all videos. Special thanks to my head-patting Fluffle fan, Puptrons and Mempups, Freakish Uproar, Lydia Scribe, and Nightfall. I love you all! And until I see you for a spotlight stream or whatever, I've been Claire. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you around. Oh, bye-bye!